What if Russia and NATO went to war in 2026? While the idea is terrifying, the reality is that the Russian military of 2026 would be a shadow of its former self, plagued by deep, systemic weaknesses. Let's break down the 5 critical vulnerabilities that could decide the outcome of such a conflict. First, let's talk about the iron. Historically, Russia's greatest strength was its almost endless supply of Soviet-era tanks and the armored vehicles. But by 2026, that well is running dangerously dry. After years of brutal attrition in Ukraine, open-source intelligence estimates that Russia has burned through more than half of its pre-war armored reserves. Their factories are good at patching up old T-62S and T-72S, but they are struggling to produce truly modern replacements like the T-14 Armata in any meaningful quantity. In a high-intensity war against NATO, Russia could face a catastrophic scenario, literally running out of quality armor within the first few months. Second is the loss of maneuver capability. The Russian military has adapted to a grueling, positional war of attrition. They've become skilled at digging trenches and using overwhelming artillery to fight over small patches of land. But this has created a massive maneuver gap. Modern NATO doctrine is built on speed, coordination, and the combined arms where tanks, infantry, and the powered work together seamlessly to punch through enemy lines. Russia has largely forgotten how to do this. Its most experienced officers and the elite units, like the FADF paratroopers, were decimated early in the Ukraine war. Many of their current units are filled with mobilized soldiers who lack the training to execute the complex, lightning-fast attacks needed to challenge NATO's high-readiness forces. Third, we have to look at the economy. While Russia's economy hasn't collapsed, by 2026 it would be under extreme internal pressure. This is the classic guns versus butter crisis. Russia is projected to be spending nearly 10% of its entire GDP on the military, a level that echoes the final, desperate years of the Soviet Union. This has fueled crippling inflation, often soaring above 15%, and created a massive labor shortage as skilled workers are either sent to the front or diverted to arms factories. On top of that, technology sanctions continue to bite hard. Russia still can't produce the high-end microchips and the precision sensors needed for its own smart weapons, forcing it to rely on smuggled parts or lower-grade technology from partners like China and North Korea. Fourth is the critical domain of fire and sea. In any direct conflict with NATO, Russia would face an overwhelming disadvantage in the skies. NATO's combined air forces, featuring hundreds of advanced stealth fighters like the F-35 and the F-22, would completely outclass Russia's aging fleet of jets. Without control of the air, Russian ground forces would be sitting ducks, vulnerable to constant and devastating precision strikes. At sea, the situation is just as grim. We've seen how vulnerable Russia's Black Sea fleet is to asymmetric attacks from sea drones. In a wider conflict, the Baltic Sea, now almost entirely surrounded by NATO countries, would effectively become a NATO lake, trapping the Russian Baltic fleet and neutralizing it as a strategic threat. Finally, and perhaps most importantly, is the demographic crisis. By 2026, Russia will be grappling with a shrinking pool of young men and the immense social cost of war. With total casualties, including killed and wounded, estimated to be well over 1 million, the Kremlin would be extremely hesitant to launch another mass mobilization. The fear of triggering major civil unrest in cities like Moscow and St. Petersburg would be very real. The government's social contract has been propped up by offering huge payments to contract soldiers. But if the fragile economy stumbles and those payments dry up, the public's willingness to fight could evaporate almost overnight. So, while the headlines might focus on Russia's pivot war economy, the underlying reality is one of fragility, a depleted arsenal, a loss of modern warfighting skills, a strained economy, vulnerability in the air and at sea, and the looming manpower crisis all paint a picture of a military that, by 2026, would be in a far weaker position to challenge NATO than at any point in recent history. Thanks for watching. If you found this analysis insightful, be sure to like the video and subscribe for more deep dives into global security and military affairs. See you in the next one.